Hello, everyone, and welcome to our EDA Summit 2023. This is our Fireside chat on event-driven APIs. I'm Denis King, and I'm the CEO here at Solace. There's lots of different discussions going on about Solace and event-driven architecture here today. But I have with me Rory from Gravitee, an up-and-coming API company, a leader in the evented API arena. Welcome, Rory. How's it going?
Good. Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, so Rory, maybe a good place to start would be just a quick introduction on Gravitee, your role there, and how things are going.
Yeah, sure. Well, like yourself, I'm the CEO here at Gravitee, have been for the past, I think about 3 years now. Everything's going very well, as you would expect. And where we really sit in this particular space, as you alluded to a moment ago, is we're trying to redefine the API management space and really take it to the next level, what we call API 3.0. And that's starting to unify both synchronous and asynchronous technologies. And that's really our differentiator from a Gravitee perspective. So I'm sure we'll get into a lot of this in a moment, but yeah, it's going really, really well, and a lot of exciting stuff to talk about. So thanks for having us.
Awesome. Yeah, no, certainly exciting times. And I mean, just to set the context, Solace obviously has been in the event-driven architecture space for quite some time, and we've watched events and streaming evolve from more niche use cases, which I think was driven largely by capital markets and gaming, to more mainstream, enterprise, because people are really seeing the business value of real-time data. And one of the big challenges we have seen for quite some time is, how do you make asynchronous information sharing simple? And if you watch the evolution of how API gateways became very popular, they really became popular with being able to monetize APIs, but the API portal, that center of the universe for an enterprise to be able to share and reuse and create policies and discover and consume APIs, is really what put APIs on the record as something significant inside an enterprise. If you look at the evented world, or events in general, as they become more pervasive, there really hasn't been something that is similar to the API portal. That's why we created the concept of an event portal. It was analogous to the API portal, to be able to provide the async API contract with the policies and the ability to reuse and share and consume events in the same way that APIs have been used in the past. So these worlds are coming together, and we have seen this happening for several years now. And I'm curious, from an organization that lives and breathes in the API management space, Rory, where do you see this going? Because you guys have been leading the idea of events and API management for some time now. And how do you see this evolving over the next 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. It's a big question as well, in the sense that, look, I think you characterized it actually really well in the way you just said it there about the evolution that we've been on in the last few years. The way that we see it, I think, to be able to determine and give a proper answer for how we see the future, it's probably worthwhile giving a bit of a perspective on how we see the last few years have evolved as well. Look, our belief is that the API management space as a whole, we know there was like middleware and like SOA architectures and all this sort of like old school stuff from many moons ago. But really the concept of the API management world and that phraseology really started to grow up around the concept of REST in, give or take, the year 2000. And the very first generation of that was effective. You referenced a moment ago about monetization, right? In actual fact, I think there was one step before it that was about productization, and actually a technical step about just simply building, managing, monitoring, securing, exposing. So what we now think of as the API lifecycle, right? That term that has become quite ubiquitous. Now, when you look at API 1.0, the challenges businesses, our view that they were solving was very much about, okay, we see this thing coming called the cloud. How do we potentially leverage the benefits and the economies of scale and all that sort of stuff that the cloud provides us with? And so that predominantly was that problem that people had, where they're moving from a heavy on-premise private deployment to a hybrid architecture. That was predominantly solved through synchronous technologies, that challenge. Now, as we've evolved, as people then started to break up that architecture, it really gave rise to what we now think of as the microservice architecture. But all you're really discussing and talking about in that first 15 or so years, from 2000 to 2015, is really fundamentally just the move from monolith to microservice. But what we now see is that people are much more interested and they're focusing much more on an event-driven architecture, right? And that's the challenge, is that those two things, how do you evolve what has happened without completely reinventing the wheel in this new world? And that's what we call event native API management, or API 3.0. Now, our view is that the next generation beyond even this starts to look at actually, to answer your question, what does the future look like from an evented API or event native API management, all these different terms? Really, my view is quite a simple one. It's about unification and about flexibility. Just thinking about those two words, unification, enabling you to be able to work with any data, any velocity of data, but applying the same core principles that you expected in your 1.0 world of your API lifecycle, applying that concept of a lifecycle to events, to APIs, to whatever it may be. And then on top of that, being able to deploy it in any architecture, so east, west, north, south, all this sort of stuff, and creating products on top of it, as you referenced a moment ago. That's one of the key things. Is what I've always seen is this hierarchy to some extent, where something always starts out as a very deeply technical solution. Typically it's about, point to point, or it's like an IoT example would be, you've got a device physically attached to some sort of widget or something like that, right? But actually what they did effectively, what other API management vendors did in like 15, 20 years ago, is they created this concept of products. And that is what, I know what you guys are focusing on, but trying to then unify that from an API product alongside an event product, that's really, in our view, the future, but also that freedom and flexibility to choose not just external consumers or only internal consumers, but the flexibility with portals and all this sort of stuff, that you have one single unified way to be able to build, manage, monitor, secure, expose, and consume all of your data services. Basically, that is the future from our perspective.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff there, Rory. I couldn't agree with you more. And it's interesting, the applications today, whether they're microservices, monolithic applications, the applications that drive our business today are leveraging APIs predominantly everywhere. You're right, it's predominantly RESTful, it's predominantly request reply. We continue to bang that system of record over and over again to get our information. But as we move more toward a different pattern, which is this asynchronous pattern, this evented pattern, it only makes sense to leverage the same concepts that we're used to. The API continues to be the medium for how we integrate with applications. So then to think about streaming or event-driven architecture, publish and subscribe, asynchronous communication, to think of any of those concepts without thinking about it in the context of API management seems like a miss. And so I couldn't agree with you more. And so maybe I'll springboard off of that and talk about governance for a second. API governance is a hot topic. Auditing, governance, control. And I think people think of API governance, different people think of it in different ways. If I just say API governance versus say event governance, what do you say to that, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic, and you could get quite deeply technical on that particular one, actually, because it could be quite a complex topic. But my overriding principle actually is similar to what I said a moment ago, which is about unification. Really, I believe that a lot of people merge the concept of governance with security, with all these different things. I think they are subtly different, actually, on those sorts of things. And governing, I think you used the word control as well, and I think that's much more aligned to the governance type of language, actually, like determining how do you govern the utilization of something, how do you govern, for example, the control structures, the data structures that go through things. And that's what we think is really interesting and smart about the gateway, is that a lot of these things that concepts like governance and stuff like that was built up around things like your open API specifications and all this sort of stuff 15 or so years ago. We've got things like the async API specification now, but I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say it's been sort of like, taking the world by storm quite yet, that sort of stuff. And I think that that's one of the key things, is starting to really create that definition of what good looks like and building around that. And that's what I think is really interesting and important. To your point, is about, how do we see the difference? In actual fact, the quick answer would be, I don't really see them differently. I think one of the key things, that if you start thinking of these things differently,
you lose
you lose that unification concept, and you start creating. One of the things that we always felt really passionately about was that, exactly to your point, why reinvent that wheel? It's been done previously, and people have, rightly or wrongly, accepted, adopted. They use REST a lot. It's all this sort of stuff. Why not sort of, where appropriate, reshape that and sort of massage it into this new way of working that is not going to change? People want more data, more accurate and more real time. And so it's incumbent upon people like you and I to actually be able to shape that market and be able to say, actually, this is the most effective way to do it. And my view, personally, is that the most effective way to do that is unification, that you try to bring these two things together.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. At the highest level, this unification concept, common catalog, common portal, common everything, and governance is just one other aspect of the unification. One of the issues that we see, and I feel it's one of the pitfalls that organizations fall into when you think about governance, is when you think about event governance a level deeper, it gets to be a little more challenging, because in the world of API governance, typically everything goes through the gateway, and the gateway is your place of defining policies. And so if you're trying to control how many times someone consumes and leverages an API, well, you can do that through the policies. There's a design time and a runtime, but you can do that through the policies of the gateway. When you get into asynchronous communication, where a single event can be sent to 10,000 applications and it can go across 30 different brokers, the way in which you provision and govern the stream and flow of information can sometimes be challenging, to the point where people actually move it back to the RESTful pattern because they're scared of their ability to govern the event streams and the way in which you consume them. So I think at the highest level, it absolutely needs to be unified. I think at the runtime level, this is an area that we've been putting a ton of effort into to try to figure out how simple we can make this, even though event brokers and event meshes are a very different architecture than, say, an API gateway. So I think we're very, very aligned on this. Maybe to move it toward use cases, bring it back up a level, Rory.
Yeah.
You guys are involved in some pretty cool use cases around API management and event native. Would you share a use case or two in terms of where you're seeing this and how you're seeing it being implemented?
Yeah, of course. I think one of the coolest ones, I can't unfortunately say their name, but one of the really coolest ones is it's a large sports organization that I'm sure many people listening would know, based in the United States. And what they've started to do actually is put some sort of physical device into players' jerseys who are on the pitch/court. And what they're basically doing is they're streaming that data, so the vital statistics. So let's say, is this person going to be able to do X, Y, or Z? And they're using that data, that new data, that volume of data that's being produced, that's being streamed out of it on the vital statistics of players. And they're wanting to actually provide that to third parties. So, for example, like bettings agencies, for example. So to be able to augment and to enhance their decision-making capabilities as to, is it likely that this person is going to be able to score X number of points or whatever it may be, and having the vital statistics. They might say, well, if somebody's heart rate is over blah, whatever that may be, the likelihood that they're going to be able to achieve this or something may be less. And so it amends the betting scores, and they feel that can be monetized effectively. And that's a very, very, very interesting use case. The reason being is that they are having to now provide that security, that governance, that control on top of streaming related streaming data effectively. But they've also got their traditional REST APIs for things like, invoicing and all this other sort of stuff, right? So how do you, that's the key thing. It comes back to that key point, unification. And so when you're particularly talking to an external party about this, and they're wanting to discover those technologies and all that sort of stuff, and discover those sorts of things, some people may feel comfortable integrating with a multitude of different technologies, but you create a barrier to entry that prevents the adoption of your data product, and therefore has a barrier to entry, I'd say, in terms of the monetization necessarily of that particular data as well. And so it really becomes very interesting. That's a very, very interesting use case from our perspective. Slightly more IoT in one sense, but yeah, super interesting.
Yeah, I love the keep us guessing with the pitch versus the court. I'm still I'm still trying to figure out who it could be, but all good. Yeah, I think, I mean, from the Solace side, you're coming at it, from an API management point of view and seeing events. We're coming at it from an evented perspective and seeing the API side, and it's interesting to see these things come together. I think I'll use one use case, which is related to manufacturing and placing an order. And in this particular organization is one of the largest manufacturing companies in all of Europe, and they were able to bring down their build time in products by half just by embracing. I'll just start by embracing EDA. But if you think about when you place an order, when anybody places an order, point of sale systems, e-commerce system, when you place an order, that is an API call. That is a traditional RESTful API call. And that's what you'd expect. And that should stay REST, and that will always stay REST. But the notification of that order, the status of that order from that point forward is much more of an asynchronous push. There's no reason for that. There's no reason for me to go back and pound the system of record or the master data over and over and over again to figure out the status of that order. And so the ability to use an API call that's REST, but then every update thereafter to be pushed out asynchronously for the consuming applications that are building these products to receive that order and start building that product provides a significant improvement in agility. And if you think about a large organization, I think this organization has something like 37 different locations, 37 different factories that are building these sites. Yeah. And you ask a very simple question. If I'm an application sitting in one of those sites, how can I figure out how I subscribe, how do I connect to get access to that notification event? This is where this unity is required, where this single pane of glass of common API management framework, where you would go in somewhere, you would understand what event that you need to subscribe to get access to that notification. This is where async API comes in and the contract for which it describes. And all of that becomes possible if you bring API management together with EDA. And you get the benefits of the async and sync down at the ground level, but you also get the benefits of simplicity and unification at the higher level. And we're seeing this everywhere. And I can honestly say that probably 80 to 90% of our deployments today are right next to us. There is API management and there's integration, and these worlds are absolutely converging. So I'm very excited about what we're seeing in the market with these types of use cases.
I think it really comes back to one thing you said a moment ago as well, because you mentioned about, it's one of the challenges that you see from it. I think it was when we were talking about governance, you were talking about how one of the challenges is that, there are going to be certain patterns, let's say, for ones for different term, where maybe a gateway may not be the most logical thing for something to go through. And that's one of the key things in your scenario is about it. One of the challenges people face today when they're moving to this sort of event-driven architecture, but they are by necessity going to have loads of, let's say, legacy architecture still associated with stuff. How do you effectively unify at the right layer? And that's where I think what we try to do with the gateway is super smart, is that we try to be able to find that balance between handing off and use the right technology at the right time, basically, but providing that single pane of glass to some extent for the governance-y type of stuff, the portals, all that sort of thing. So it is a super complex topic, and it's super interesting to hear what your customers, some of the stuff that your customers are doing as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue into our partnership. I think if I look at the evolution of this, I think, events have been around for quite some time, and I look at this through three architectural patterns. The one that has been around the longest is everything is REST at the API level. Yeah. But then there's the east-west events, and that's sort of the sidecar strategy. And then there's this, everything goes through the gateway strategy. And then there's the next where the gateway's still in the picture, but it's providing specific value around the events. And you guys play a big role in this around throttling and governing some of the policies around the events. And then the third evolution is really where, there are certain cases where you just want that event to go directly to the application and not go through the gateway. And this is where the event brokers come into play. And in all three scenarios, you need unity at the top, and you need a combination of, event-driven architecture and APIs. And, we announced a partnership, I don't know, was it sort of 4 months ago now, 5 months ago now, I'm guessing. And, I think
one of those.
The partnership is all based on thought leadership and driving this industry with the analysts, with customers, and really define the art of the possible. And I've been really excited about this partnership strategically, Rory, and I appreciate you guys taking the time and energy working with Solace. And I just wanted, what's your take on the partnership, how things are going, and what can we be doing to move this needle forward into the future?
Yeah, look, I think everything you said. Firstly, I would say that I'm equally as excited by, like you and I spoke about many times, I'm a big believer in this, and I'm super excited by this, by the event space, by what I feel we can do together actually in this space. I think there is a huge opportunity here that fundamentally no other combination of event company / API management company, I think, has that unique capability like we do together at this particular point in time. So I think about it incredibly positively, actually. In terms of, the future and what we could do, I think your point is, let's be fair about where this is at this particular, this concept of event native API management. It is still fairly nascent, I would say, at this particular point in time. People are definitely feeling the pain associated with it. But what I notice most, I think, is that people have not yet worked out how to. I think it's because there aren't loads of API management vendors out there, or there aren't any others really that can effectively solve this pain at this particular point in time, alongside yourselves, for example. So that combination hasn't really existed before. And so I think what we've started to notice is that people who manage in terms of their Scrum teams, for example, their Scrum teams where they own the API management alongside their event technology, tend to be more identify this pain, let's say, better than other people, because they've seen, I've solved this before with API management, whereas people where it's separated.
Yes, good point.
May not necessarily. So that feeds into what we would call our ideal customer profile, that sort of stuff. But we feel absolutely, firstly, the partnership that we've got with you guys, and I mean that as a much broader term in terms of the people involved, yourself, Sean, Sumit, etc., Bruno, like we love the team. We think you guys are great. And we think there's a huge amount to do here. And I think at this particular point in time, it's very much about continuing to show people what the future really looks like at this particular point in time, show them what unification looks like, try to, I think a lot of it's about education at this particular point in time, and help people see, what the benefits of the future might hold potentially. That's how I see it from our perspective. I think there's a great opportunity, and we're already starting to see a huge amount of benefit, a huge number of people and customers wanting to address it. I'm interested to understand from your perspective as well, where you see that potential future going.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think it is absolutely a nascent market, and insofar as there is a significant install base of EDA, there's a significant install base of API management, and the timing and the journey for each of those are not always in sync. And the personas and the buyers are not always in sync. And so that does not remove the fundamental belief that these two things together are absolutely essential and are absolutely the future, because, as I said earlier, every single application leverages an API. Underneath that API, there are two patterns, synchronous and asynchronous. Why would you separate these as two ships in the night within an organization? It only makes sense for these two ships in the night to come together. So it will happen. It is happening. But there needs to be more alignment down at the ground level with, rip and replace, timing, personas, analysts. But all of this is happening. What I've seen in the last 12 months alone has been unbelievable in the evolution of the thinking and the way the various analysts are talking about it, the way we're seeing it with clients. But like I said, even though certain clients may want to move, the timing of their various pieces are maybe not always aligned. So that always takes time. It's a sign of a maturing market. And we probably have not crossed the chasm yet, but I think 2 years from now, we'll be looking back at this session and saying, wow, look how far we've come. So no, this is great, Rory. Listen, I think we've been told our time is getting near here, so I wanted to say thanks again for a great session here, great discussion. I look forward to a lot more in the future between Solace and Gravitee, and generally just moving this market forward together. So thanks so much. Great speaking with you.
Thank you.